I still feel good though.
Yeah.
Like, are you supposed to feel? Are you supposed to
feel how you look?
Let's defer to the old guy.
I'm not looking at you specifically, but I'm more like in general. Like, of course, like I'm not as strong as I used to be in the gym and stuff like that. Like, I can feel it there, but like otherwise, like, when I get out of bed in the morning, I still feel good. I'm not like.
It's because you're physically active and
I guess so.
Take care of all the
You
other
take care of yourself, right? Which goes to show you that you need to take care of yourself. Like, how many people have you seen?
You had so many opportunities just to go in for the jugular.
We were being serious
Yeah,
there.
you just let it.
Yeah.
Let that slide.
How many people do you remember you see from high school, and you're like, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they look like 10, 20 years older than you are, right? Because they just didn't take care of themselves. They kept eating the McDonald's, kept drinking the soda, and like catches up to them.
I do have a couple friends who still eat whatever they want.
Really?
And still look great.
That's the exception.
Just like,
that's the exception. That's not the rule. Would you say?
The ageless wonder. Still looks 25, and like he's not paleo, keto, natural, anything like that.
Right.
He just is, right?
Down in Twinkies.
That could change at any time, but right now he's
good genetics,
still
I
got
guess.
it going.
Yeah, it could switch. As we know, the switch could flip at any second.
Doesn't happen overnight. Just that.
No.
No.
It's
a gradual
creeping
decline.
death.
Okay. Creeping death. All right. So today we're going to talk about mastering the mobility game. We're going to talk about kind of the movement game, and Coach Oscar is going to be a bit on the hot seat today.
That's why I'm in the middle.
Yeah, that's where we're in the middle today. For those of you that
it's a good spot.
should
keep you there.
Yeah, we just like put you in the middle, like it's like a small child of like making sure you can't go anywhere, or like
I feel like I gotta fight my way out of the podcast.
Like you can't like screw off and screw around. We can like keep tabs on you when you're in the middle.
Can't daydream when you're in the middle.
This is actually good. I do like this setup. Not that I don't like sitting beside you, Coach, but
sure.
We keep this guy in line. You don't need to be kept.
PK's got to lean in though when he's on the outside.
Yeah, it's good. He's more engaged. He's more engaged. So first of all, I want to kick it off like the movement game. We'll call it the movement game first, and we'll get into mobility because I think
I want to distinguish those two.
That's why I want to distinguish those two. So we're going to focus on mobility today because it's mastering the mobility game. But I think the introduction to it is to start introducing the movement game, quote unquote, and kind of the stuff that you specialize in. And because I think that's going to be its own episode. But for today, we're going to talk about mobility and then how we can use mobility to improve performance and to limit and reduce injuries. It's kind of like the direction we're going to go in today. So why don't you, in your words, and we'll all chime in on what's the difference between kind of the movement game and then mobility?
Well, I'll start with mobility. Mobility is being able to express your range of motion through strength. And then movement is, it depends like who you see, and because there's so many Instagram people, and they kind of just water it down to like some kind of sexy animal moves or something, flows. But really it's like, it's the perspective that you look at your body with, and we'll say your physical activity with. So going to the best things, the best elements of each thing. So for upper body strength, for example, I always say this, but gymnasts, lower body strength, powerlifting or Olympic lifting, hand balancing, for being able to invert in general. And then for mobility, gymnasts or contortionists, those are, or some martial arts like wushu, they have really great flexibility and mobility. And yeah, so that's kind of the movement perspective on things.
Okay, so we're gonna keep it in the mobility side for today's conversation, and then like I said, we're gonna set up another episode and talk about kind of that movement world. So as a funny joke, it's not really a joke, but
you don't know
when we met, I don't know any jokes, not any funny jokes, anyways. So Penguin walks into a bar,
okay,
and he asks the bartender, "Have you seen my brother?" And the bartender says, "What does he look like?"
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, moving on. So we met at
That was
Combat.
so bad.
We met at I already saw it on a movie
So
the other
bad.
night. That was funny. We met at Combat Arts, pretty much, right? And
Yeah.
there was a while there, I was working out of there regularly, working with a lot of their athletes and their fighters.
Yeah.
And I was kind of the guy who looked at things a little differently. You know,
Right.
I incorporated more mobility training, more movement training into our athletic training versus just your kind of typical strength training approach. And it's funny because as I kind of started to work there a little less, as we opened our own facility and whatnot, and you started to kind of work there a little more, it's almost like you became my replacement in
Yeah.
terms of you're the mobility guy, and I know how much you love that,
Yeah.
and that's why I wanted to bring that up. Because I just know how much
Yeah.
you love hearing that.
Yeah.
So you became the mobility guy, which
Yeah.
I was kind of that before you,
Mhm.
but then I think you took it to another level, and you don't like that term.
No.
And
'Cause-
why don't you like that?
Because it
term?
dumbs down what I do. The only reason, like most people just see me always doing mobility stuff because I suck at it. Like 5 years ago, I couldn't touch my toes without having to bend my knees,
Right.
which is a legitimate thing. And now I'm working on trying to touch my head to my toes. So,
Right.
yeah, like I suck so bad at mobility that I have to work on it every day. And that's why people will see me working on it and they're like, oh, he just does stretching. He just stretches all day.
Yeah.
You know, that's why. And
That's pretty impressive. That because when I look at it, 5 years is not that long. To some people, it seems like a lifetime, but it's really not that long in the grand scheme of things. And the fact that you were able to make such great progression from, as you said, not being able to touch your toes to working on putting your head to your toes, I mean, that's phenomenal.
like from a standing, feet together, knees locked out
Yeah.
position, I could only reach halfway down my shin.
Really?
Yeah, like I was so tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was embarrassing.
But how do you think most people go on that scale? Because so here's the thing, people when you say touch your toes, nobody does it strict, we'll call it, right? They bend their knees a little bit, they round their back, so they're really not testing in their hip range or their hamstring flexibility in this case. How many people do you think struggle with that? And how important do you think that is?
Everybody struggles with it. Well, most office dwellers will struggle with it, right? Just because all the sitting,
Yeah,
and that's shortening your hamstrings.
yeah.
keep talking.
It's good, we're good, we're good.
PK was adjusting the mic. Yeah, so I think everybody will struggle with it, unless, of course, you put attention to it. Maybe you're a yogi or something, and then your hamstrings might be okay. But most people, I think that's a really major issue for them.
But this also shows how tremendously it can be improved if you work at it. And so, from your starting position, a lot of people would just think, "Oh, this is just how I am." And maybe I can get a little bit better, but this is just how I am. Some people are born like this. And I don't subscribe to that at all.
Yeah.
Because looking at your position, your starting point, and being able to almost do the splits, to almost touch your head to your toes in a very short period of time. I mean, it just shows you how much you can improve on your flexibility or any skill if you put that time in.
And it's one of those things that can be worked on every day. So there's always work to be done, and especially if you suck, you'll gain such benefit from working at it every day, because it is hard work. And anybody that's taken any of my classes or worked with me privately knows that I could pick 3 mobility exercises, and you can train in them in a circuit fashion, and you will break a sweat, no
Right.
problem.
Right.
And it doesn't look easy necessarily, but when you actually have to do it, it's brutal.
So, like, on that point, I want to just clear something up because I want to help people understand the difference. We kind of described the difference between like movement practice and mobility, but I want to define the difference between mobility and flexibility, because most people kind of associate the two as being the same thing when they're totally not the same thing. They're definitely related. So again, you already said the definition of mobility. Do you want to say that again?
Yeah, expressing a range of motion through strength.
Right. So now flexibility, on the other hand, do you want to define that for listeners? Or do you want
Through a passive range of
Yeah,
motion.
it's basically a passive range of motion.
Yeah.
So, sitting, like touching your toes you were talking about, or like sitting on the ground and reaching down to your toes, or, doing the splits just passively. These are two different things, but mobility incorporates that flexibility base plus strength. And mobility is more of an indicator of, in my opinion, of athletic performance and athletic potential than just flexibility. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there where people are just too heavily focused on flexibility. And I work with a lot of different types of athletes who have testing protocols with their different sports and teams, and a lot of those protocols are dated. And they're just doing basic flexibility tests, which don't indicate necessarily the athletic performance. In some cases, you might think that, well, it can be reducing the likelihood of injury, but in many cases, if someone is too flexible, as I've seen, like they might have a huge score on a flexibility test, but that's potentially exposing them to further injury. So it's like that fine line between, do I work on mobility or do I work on flexibility? And the majority of the stuff that I've seen, you doing with yourself, with your clients, with your class, it has a heavier mobility range, which means there's a lot of strength involved. So we always when I'm working with an athlete, the first thing I kind of focus on, if I see that their mobility in an area kind of sucks, instead of spending time working just on the flexibility, you're going to get a better increase by working on strength more so, because strength develops faster than flexibility. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So getting people in these positions and understanding this position sucks for you, or this movement sucks for you, work on your strength, and that's going to improve your mobility.
You're tricking your nervous system into, well, not tricking, but you're training your nervous system to understand that it's safe in extreme ranges of motion with a growth in strength in those extreme ranges of motion.
So, for an example, and Coach BK, I want you to chime in on this because you're kind of a prototypical example of this. You were a sprinter through university and stuff like that, high school, university, and by nature, you are quote unquote tighter in certain positions, flexibility wise. However, your strength allows you to get into positions that are effective, and obviously if you're a high level sprinter as you were, and now a high level powerlifter, it's amazing how if people just look at the flexibility and think, well, this guy's not going to be fast or explosive or dynamic or whatnot, but how important that strength is in terms of that mobility. And then I see a big fault of people taking an athlete like yourself and say, well, he's tight in the hamstrings, for example. We better stretch his hamstrings out. We better get some real flexibility going in his hamstrings. But then you take away, that's like one of your quote unquote strengths or adaptabilities, traits that allow you to run fast. Because that tightness, increases that recoil, and that strength helps you work through that range of motion. But then you take someone and it's like, well, your flexibility sucks here, so we better fix it. And then now all of a sudden, hey, we fixed your flexibility, but you're running slower. Have you experienced that at all, throughout your career and stuff like that?
I think it depends on where the person is on the strength spectrum, right? So for someone like myself, I think flexibility can play a very important role, especially me being a little bit older, to continue to ensure that I can get into the proper positions. And so where a lot of people kind of think static stretching and static flexibility has no purpose in a training program, it's actually very helpful for someone like myself at the stage that I'm at, where before a squat workout I'll spend maybe 15, 20 minutes doing mobility, but there will also be a lot of static stretching on my hip flexors, on my glutes, hamstrings to a lesser degree, and my tibialis anterior, my calves. Very important, because when I do that and I lengthen those areas, I get into positions a lot better, right? And so it's become important. And then during my track days, and this would apply to just about any high-level sprinter or track and field athlete, they spent a lot of time doing static stretching. And it was, I see it frowned upon in current strength and conditioning literature, but I mean, I can remember the warm-up like it was yesterday. It would be maybe an 800 to a 1 mile jog, followed by some dynamic stuff, dynamic flexibility stuff, and you'd spend another 15, 20 minutes on static stretching before you started your accelerations, which means like short sprints, 10 to 30 meters in length, gradually increasing in speed, and that would be the more specific warm-up prior to the actual workout. But there's a lot of static stretching, whether you're looking at Olympic level or high school level, and in part that's because that's what was always done, but I also think there's a lot of value to that. And with folks that are, as Oscar said, office dwellers, very sedentary people, they're going to have a tendency more often than not to be tight. And I see both of you do it with your athletes when they come in. A lot of Oscar's people will spend a lot of time in a full squat, stretching out their adductors, stretching out their hips. There's a bit of motion, but there's some static flexibility going on there. And you, with almost everybody, will spend a lot of time doing that rear foot elevated hip flexor stretch with additional tension using a band, because that's what they need. They've been sitting like this for 12 hours in the car, in the office. The only thing that you're going to do to really lengthen that is a prolonged static stretch.
For sure.
Which is going to help you to do the workout that you have planned, right? So I think, long rambling story, but I think static flexibility has a very important role for the majority of people these days, because the majority of people are very tight. There are the outliers, like one of our OHL hockey players, extreme flexibility, and that approach would be counterproductive for him.
Absolutely.
Right? So you would definitely not want to take that approach at someone like that. They need more strength, and that's where their biggest weakness is. But most people are way too tight and could use a lot more static stretching.
Yeah, I think that comes down to the need of proper assessment and constantly assessing people. I know, like, for us, when someone walks in the door, like, I'm assessing them the moment they walk in, every time. I'm watching them walk, move, put their things down, pick things up. And you can pretty much tell if you have a decent eye for people. Okay, today this person's tight. First thing I'll ask them, how hydrated are you? Yeah. And I usually know the answer right away, or I'll know if they're lying or not, because hydration would be a key indicator, or maybe they've been sitting at their desk too long or in their car or whatnot. And so I definitely think static stretching has a great role as an opener up, so to help open people up and get them going, get some blood circulating through their body. Again, in the right dose, for the right person, in the right time. There's no right or wrong answer. It's not like always flexibility or never flexibility. It's when applied accordingly. Mm-hmm. But I think that there's an important thing. I just think that my whole point here is that knowing your athlete or knowing your individual, and then knowing what to prescribe to them, and knowing that, hey, this certain area that might be a little tight is actually part of their strength, quote unquote. So don't, stretch that, warm it up, but don't necessarily get into structure or tissue change, right? So there's a difference between like lengthening a muscle as you warm it up, get some blood in it, calming it down, opening it up, getting it warm, getting it ready to perform. That's great. And then there's like structure change. So if you're really trying to change the structure of the tissue, i.e. make it longer permanently, that is when you really have to get into that consciousness of how much does that need to happen and how often it needs to happen. Right. I think in Oscar, the stuff I see you do with your guys, it's like, guys and girls, it's going to require changes in structure, because like they can't do it. Even if they're warmed up, they still can't do it. Yeah. So it's a factor of structural abilities. And then the one thing that my experience is you got to be conscious of, and we were kind of talking about this yesterday, working on that hip drill, is people can do this every day if it's still like anything, if it's dosed properly. Like you can squat every day, as we know, if the intensities are adapted for that. Right? You're not going to do max squat every day. You're not going to do high volume every day. So that your joints, for example, work the same way. Like you can't overload your hip flexor every single day for tissue change, because like the end points or the weak points are going to start to act up. You're going to start to get inflammation or quote unquote itises or I hate the word arthritis, 'cause I think tendonitis or all these things, but those things will become prevalent if you're overloaded and you're not given enough time to recover. So I kind of want to know, Oscar, like your thoughts on that, because I see you working on drills, same drills a lot, like every day, you know, and you definitely got a result, an incredible result, and you do that with your clients and your athletes. You know, what's your thoughts on frequency
Yeah.
and in relation to intensity, as kind of I'm saying?
So I think if you did like passive stretching every day, there's definitely like negative that comes with that. But the method of stretching under the Ido Portal method that I learned is loaded progressive stretching, and that's under strength in a progressive way. So people that like me, when I started out only halfway down my shin to now touching my toes, you work progressively towards that under there's specific rules for each exercise that you just can't break to keep the tension in areas that need to be with tension. So I think if you do it with that, it's possible to do it every day. Now, on some days am I too sore to do it, and I notice like maybe I need a day off or I need to deload this, for sure, and I do that as well. But it's kind of just getting in there. I intend to do the work, but if I see that it's going to be a shit show, then I'm like, okay, just pull back, and we'll get back at this tomorrow. Or I might try one set. Maybe I need one set to get loose, and then okay, we'll keep rolling. But it's kind of like an intuitive thing. But I find the loaded progressive stretching, because of the strength component, it's fairly safe, and because you can progress it to your level. So if you're really immobile, you'll still get a ton of benefit from like, you're barely moving. You're moving like 15 degrees of range of motion, but you'll get tremendous benefit just over time. So you can do that every day because it's just not gonna fry you, right?
And I think what you said there, like, you didn't say it this way, but I always look at it as a sense of there's information and knowledge, and then there's wisdom, right? So it's like, knowledge dictates that, you know, you do this all the time, for example, but wisdom dictates, hey, if something doesn't feel right, let me back off a little bit. Maybe go back in a little bit, but then on that second feel, if it's still there, you know what, let me just kind of step back. I know it's in my programming, I know it's what I'm supposed to be doing, but at the same time, like, common sense has to come into play there. You know, with yourself, you know, when you work on your own stuff, and then when you're working with your clients and your athletes, like, there has to be common sense, and I feel like that's something's a bit lacking in our industry. It's just about forcing things down people's throats and making them do it until they get hurt, and then they wonder why they got hurt. Like, I think I see that too much, so I think that's just a really important thing to bring up and to mention.
It's a balancing act in like doing that, where you realize, okay, today's not going to go, versus I don't feel like doing it, and I'm telling myself a story that it's not going to go. But it will go. It's just harder today because maybe I'm a little tired, maybe I didn't get enough sleep, maybe blah, blah, blah. And then, you just chicken out from doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's a fine line too, right? And that comes with wisdom, right? Like, what is the day I'm just like, I just don't really want to do it, I'm being lazy, I'm being a baby?
Yeah.
Or like, something's generally off, and I have to respect that. It's, you know, like, are you injured or are you hurt?
Right, yeah.
One of the best lines ever, right?
Yeah.
From the program. One of the best lines.
Most people are in that telling themselves a story. too.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
Because most people don't train as hard as they think they train, and there's so much more potential for them to push further. And most people haven't discovered what it's like to really work through pain and soreness, not injury, pain and soreness, and to be comfortable with that. And, so yes, there are exceptions where, there's a legitimate issue and you should address that, but the vast majority of the time, most people are just trying to talk themselves out of it. And we're all in that camp, right? Because the stuff, as much as we love it, it's uncomfortable, it can be hard, it can hurt, and so you really have to, that self-talk really has to be in check sometimes to make you go to the gym and do the work when you don't want to do it, right?
Yeah, I was reading something pretty cool this morning, and they were talking about motivation and action, and basically like kind of what you're saying, the self-talk, but like there's many days where your motivation isn't going to be as powerful as the action that you want to do at that moment, but you don't always have to correlate high level of motivation with high level of action. And the concept is sometimes the motivation will have to catch up, meaning, as we know, and this is great for like training, right? Like just go to the gym,
Get there.
start doing the work,
Yeah.
and mysteriously the motivation starts to catch
Yeah,
up that was
yeah.
lagging behind. If you're always waiting for the motivation to lead you into action, you're gonna tell stories and back out more often than not.
Yeah.
Versus like, the motivation will catch up
Yeah.
once I get into action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, if you only worked out on the days that you felt good,
Yeah.
you wouldn't work out that often, right?
There'd be a lot of workouts missed,
Yeah.
as we've seen with a lot of people over the years, right?
Yeah.
So I want to talk about specific areas, and we'll get to that in a second, that we think that mobility is really something that's necessary that a lot of people are struggling with. But before I get into that, this is always an interesting conversation, and Coach Peak and I have had these types of conversations for years and years and years. We've been in this game for so long, and we've seen so many different things come and go, and hot topics and prioritization in terms of like training and programming and all these good things. And Coach Piquet, sometimes we joke and call him Captain Context, and he's always good at bringing things back to just like the reality of what's logical, right? As this mobility world has kind of come up and become more popular in the last few years, and a lot more people, like you said, on social media and promoting it, it's become, sometimes I've seen it, and there's been a few cases where I think I've actually gone too far with a few of my athletes in it, and this is a couple of years ago when it was still new and I was really into it, but like finding that right dose of what is the right amount of time that an athlete should be spending doing mobility work versus, for example, conditioning work, strength work, power work, these types of things, like your traditional things that are going to, as we say, move the needle. And of course, this is always assessment based, but I want to get Coach PK's thoughts on this, because I always respect what he says on these things. But do you think people do that? Spend too much time in this world now, and not enough time in what really can move the needle? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think in general we fall in love with the shiny new toy, right? So all of the latest trends become more attractive because of their newness, because of their recency. And it's just human nature. We fall into that because it's exciting and it adds a new dimension to our athletes' training, and it's something we haven't discovered before or we forgot about, and so we buy into it. And a lot of these new trends have a lot of value. And I shouldn't even call them trends. A lot of these new modalities, whether it be mobility, different types of conditioning, different types of strength work, they all have value. You just have to recognize that your session with your athlete, or when your athlete is training on their own, that time is finite. Let's use an hour because that's conventionally what a session is with the personal training world. And usually what the amount of time people have when they go to the gym on their own is an hour, give or take, right? And so, as you said, it's assessment-based, it's goal-specific. What are we focusing on? What are we prioritizing? And based on that, you can gauge what you need to do first and what should have less emphasis, right? If you're tight and you can't get into positions in basic strength movements and it's affecting your performance, you should be prioritizing mobility in addition to strength, and maybe you put the other modalities on the back burner until you get that up to a level of non-suckness, basic competence.
Yeah.
And as that has increased and your goals change, then you shift the priority. So I think people have to look at things like that. What are your needs, what are your goals, and then prioritize the modality according to the goal. Not falling in love with, oh, animal flow is the latest thing. It's Coach Oscar's pet peeve, right? So let's all start doing that, even though, you don't necessarily need that in your training program, but you're just doing it because everybody else is doing it, right?
Yeah, and I find and we've had this conversation a lot, one of the things we struggle with sometimes is when you work with younger athletes and the parents are around and, the parents have an idea of what quote unquote strength conditioning looks like to them. But when you get that athlete in there and we have enough experience to look at an athlete and start working with them and realize, yeah, you need to spend some more time, for example, over here fixing this ankle, hip, knee issue before we can start, working you hard, quote unquote, right? Like if that's not fixed, you're basically on the verge of breaking something.
Mm-hmm.
And our job first and foremost is to have healthy athletes. That's what I always say. And then the second job is help them perform. They could be the best performer, but if they're on the verge of breaking down, then we're not doing our job properly. So, I really like what you said is really taking that time, which we always like to do, and assess, be clear, what are the limitations, get those cleaned up, and then start working in the right direction. But at the same time, there is always a balance between getting them engaged in some of those other things while they're developing those basic mobility
Mm-hmm.
skills so that they're still going to not fall behind too much. I think that's a huge thing. What are your thoughts on that?
I usually, for better or for worse, I expect a lot out of my students. Typically at first we look at mobility stuff because everybody needs it. Basic squatting, basic hanging, and then some of the loaded progressive stretching. But honestly, I shouldn't have to sit there for an hour and make sure you're doing enough reps of loaded progressive stretching. You can totally do that on your own. Once I explain it to you, just go do it on your own. And then we can take the time for a session, the 1 hour, to work on something else that maybe you can't do on your own, or you need some supervision or whatever, or you don't have the equipment at home or whatever. But yeah, that's usually what I expect out of my people. For some people have a hard time following it, other people don't, because it is kind of a big expectation of people, I guess.
I think it's good that you have high expectations, because I think it more often than not the standards will be raised by them because you expect more from them. Some people won't meet the standard given other things going on in their lives, and that's just that's life, exactly. But others will rise to that occasion because you've set the bar high, and I see it with Coach G as well. Expect a lot, and you just might get it.
Yeah, right. And there's wiggle room for failures and things and setbacks, but
yeah, you have empathy as well.
Right.
People are going to come in with real life situations, but again, the standards are still high because you know that they can achieve so much if they put that work in. Right?
yeah.
Totally. Okay, let's break down a few specific areas that we all think. So we'll each give one kind of what do you think is a key area where people are lacking mobility and it's creating A, limitations, and B, oftentimes injuries. So if you were to prioritize, we'll start with you, Coach, and you guys are probably going to give my favorite one, but let's see where we go.
Because I value the squat as such a fundamental exercise for building strength and for building resilience, like resistance to injury, I find a lot of people, including myself, are very tight in the calves and are very tight in the hips, and so.
Yes, two. You can't use two.
I'll
Go through the list.
So go through all of them in one shot.
I'll stick with calves because I think that affects people's ability to get into positions, right? And calf tightness is a result of so many different things, but it's a limitation when it comes to being able to get proper squat depth.
For sure.
And if you can get proper depth, then you can load the bar properly, you can get into position properly, and you can get the most benefit from that exercise. So I think it's neglected a lot, but I think if people lengthen their calves and their improve their ankle mobility, I think that would lead to a better squat and better performance on the squat.
Yeah, most people have no idea, like when we tell them like squat depth, the key indicator is ankle mobility. Most people have like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, if you can't get in that ankle mobility, you're not going to get into those quote unquote ass to grass bottom type squats because you won't be able to get in those positions. That's a good one. I love that one. It's one of my favorites. Coach Oscar.
I'd say hamstrings.
Okay.
Again, we talked about it earlier, but just the constant sitting of most people, both at the office and then driving, and also probably at home if they're not active. They just go home and sit around on the couch. So yeah, hamstrings cause a variety of issues, low back problems, all that kind of stuff. So I know if I drive for too long, I start to feel it. I get like this almost sciatic feeling down my left side, and I'm like, okay, I gotta go do some basic hamstring stuff to shake that rust off.
Oh, it's so true, and that ties that's so relevant to the other foundation exercise that I'm a big fan of, and that being the deadlift, right? And all movements that are related to the deadlift, kettlebell swing, good morning, any hinge type movement. If the hamstrings are tight, the ability to get into that hinge is compromised, and the risk of injury is so much higher, right? There's so many athletes that come through here that have such a tough time getting into that hinge position, and that hamstring lack of flexibility is a big problem. Big source of
it actually blows my mind when we work with like younger athletes. We're talking like 8 to 10 years old. It blows my mind at the lack of hamstring flexibility and mobility in these kids, and it's like they are the new generation of sitting, playing video games, watching YouTube. Like when we were kids, well, Oscar, you're still a kid, but when Coach PK and I were kids,
stickball in Brooklyn,
we trade baseball cards with like gum in them and stuff like that. But like we were out playing a lot as kids. Like we were out until the sun went down and our parents yelled and told us to come in and all that good stuff. Where
I am seeing that in my new neighborhood.
Are you?
Which is so refreshing.
Oh, there's kids outside?
Yeah, so I told you, like our townhouse complex is like a square, and in the middle of the square there's a park.
Oh, nice.
And so, we had the longest winter ever, so people weren't outside, but in the past couple of weeks, right after school, there's like a ton of kids that are playing either at the park itself or there's like a makeshift soccer field, and they're all playing that. And what makes it more exciting is that the kids are inclusive. Like if another kid comes out, like my son, for example, they'll invite him to play.
Yeah.
And they're all just out and about playing out there for hours, which is exactly what you're making reference to, which is what we did when we were younger. So it's good to see that it's not completely dead.
It's not completely dead. Well, it's not showing in a lot of the kids when we get
and there are no, and sorry to interrupt,
yeah.
there are, with the exception of me, just because my kids are so young, there are no parents there.
Right.
And so the other kids that are there are 6 to 10, 11, right? So they're a little bit older where they can be out there and you can look out the back window and okay, so-and-so is okay.
Yeah.
My little one is still, doesn't know how to climb steps yet, so I got to be out there, but it's good to see that there's unsupervised play as well, because I think that is so lacking today.
And it's a bit of a closed community there too, right?
So it's safer.
It's all just local people in there, right?
Yeah. But with that unsupervised play comes that creativity and that creative movement that we're not seeing enough of, that people are now starting to embrace, right? These kids are just doing cool stuff on their own. They're walking differently, they're climbing differently, they're playing on the monkey bars differently without their parents saying do this or do that, right? So that's good to see.
So I'm going to bring in the third one on this, and I'm going to say hip flexors. So we're saying in the hips, you said hamstrings, and I would associate the contra, basically the alternative muscle, that would be hip flexors. So those are, again, sitting all day, those muscles are getting tight, they're getting shortened, and then when you go to stand up and those muscles are tight, you're going to get kind of this anterior tilt of your pelvis. And people don't realize, but your spine sits down in your pelvis, so if your pelvis is rotated, your spine is rotated, and then you're going to get all host of problems. I would say the majority of people that come in with back issues here just basically have tight hip flexors, and you work on the mobility there, you work on the strength there, and it cleans it up. Cleans up their back pain almost instantly, where previously they'd be going to their doctor or whatnot, and they're getting treatment on their back, and they're getting all kinds of nonsense, when really just deal with the hip flexors, and you'll clean that back pain up almost right away. And one way to deal with that is, you mentioned the hamstrings, a lot of times we say something's tight, something's weak. So hip flexors are usually really tight, and hamstrings are really weak. So they can't even do these basic hinge motions because they don't even know, as crazy as it sounds, how to hang off of their hamstring.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know how to put a load on their hamstring because it's just so foreign. It's like they're putting that load on their lumbar and their erectors and their QL and all these things, but they can't hang off their hamstring, they can't hang off of their glute. So I think hips in general, whether you want to talk about all directions, that is a ball and socket joint, so it moves in all directions. I think that is probably the biggest opportunity for most people in terms of longevity, health, balance, as people start to get older even. Like, you work that area and like you're going to open up all kinds of possibilities, and you're going to open up all kinds of different exercises they can do in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do that, like, the sky's kind of the limit. So I'm going to say hip flexors, but again, tying it with the hamstrings is hips in general is a huge area.
Yeah.
You got any other ones?
And then I'd say shoulders would be the next
That's
one,
the
right?
key,
I think we all, myself, I use myself as kind of the example because of, being an older athlete and having that many years of training, and not always the right type of training, which has led to imbalances and tightness in certain areas. I think prioritizing that shoulder mobility and flexibility allows you to get into proper positions on the squat, right?
Yeah.
On the squat, allowing your elbows to sit down, to hang down, and then with all pressing movements, right? Most people come in and you introduce them to an overhead pressing motion, and they end up doing this, believing that they're actually straight when
Right.
their arms are actually in front of them, right? And you manually correct their hands so that their arms, so that their biceps are in line with their ears, and it's foreign, it's uncomfortable for them. Over time, you work that mobility coupled with the strength, and they're able to do that to do a proper overhead press without any issues.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to some other like gymnastic style coaches, and I can't think of his name, Oscar will have the name on top of his head. He was on Tim Ferriss, and he says like
Coach Sonnen?
Coach Summers, Coach Summers. He talks about shoulder extension as being a key limiting factor, and I don't disagree with that. But I actually think shoulder flexion, in more cases, is leading to a lot of issues for people. I think when you start to get people into shoulder extension, which is basically standing, imagine standing and putting your arms backwards behind you. That would be extension, and the flexion would be standing and raising your arms forward over your head. I think flexion is a huge issue, and I would address that first and get people better in those positions, hence the hang. Oscar does a drill with all these people, and that's basically just a hanging drill to help open up that flexion of that shoulder, help open up that lat. Those rotators are all tight down, and they help to deal with that as well. So opening that up, opening flexion up, allowing the shoulder, and this is a huge one, allowing the shoulder, or the arm in this case, and the scapula to move independently of each other. We call that disassociation. Can you move? And this is crazy, like how often I see this, and you could be a world-class athlete, and most people have a hard time moving their arm without moving their scapula. And your scapula, folks don't know, is basically your shoulder blade, where your arm bone comes in and connects into your shoulder. So teaching mobility there and learning how to move that arm without moving that scapula is going to save your shoulder. It's going to cut down a lot of shoulder issues and injuries, and also allow you to be stronger and more powerful.
And it builds some kinesthetic awareness too. Like
Right.
you actually have some control over what you're doing with your meat vehicle.
Your what?
Meat vehicle. It's your vehicle through life, and it's made of meat.
Yes.
That's a new one.
Yes,
Yeah.
so that is
There
a-
you go.
You
Write that
you
down.
wait
Oscar-
all
Oscar's
shot.
Write that
had a
down.
few- he's had a few good ones
Oh.
over the past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
The others others can't be named on this podcast. But,
Where did you steal that from, or did
I
you
can't
just come
remember.
up
I
with
don't
that?
know where I stole it from.
That's a good one.
All ideas are stolen.
I might use that. I'm not going to quote you though, because
Don't.
you don't know where it's
Don't.
from. So,
Don't.
anything else, Coach, you could think of, like on the things you see? I mean, the only other I would add to that right up top would be knees.
yeah, I would say the quads. As
Yeah,
well.
because
Yeah.
quads, like again, a
It's
lot
tied to
of
the hips, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
neglect those.
I wouldn't. A lot of knee issues that show up here are just simply from overloaded quads, and that comes back to the hips because the hips don't have that mobility or that kinesthetic awareness as we just brought up. So they're basically sitting and standing is a better way, standing in their knees instead of standing in their hips,
Mhm.
and that's like a postural thing. Like poor posture starts at the ankles, as you brought up, and then it's really heavily weighted on the knees. I think when you watch people squat and teach them how to squat, most people like initiate all movements through their knee,
Mhm.
and that's just overloading that quad constantly. So freeing up those knees is definitely a huge one.
The other one I'd say is spine extension in your spine, going
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah,
Everybody always we drop something or we bend to pick something up, so we're always flexing, but extending back and going into that back range in obviously a safe, progressive way. Don't try and do like I don't know, back handsprings or something at the park right now. But that's another important thing, just so you practice the duality of flexion and extension. And rarely ever do we see it, especially not in general population, mainstream fitness places. You don't really see that happening at all.
no, it's it has to be taught properly. It has to be supervised. To your point.
Yeah, it's cool to see it with our young athletes. And we have a young swimmer who's coming in today, who has a gymnastics background, and you guys have all seen it during the warm up. You know, we're going through the basic things, basic drills, and she'll just drop into a back bridge or drop into a back handspring, and she hasn't done gymnastics for years.
Yeah.
But that skill is still there because she moves and she's very active and she still does it, right? So it's good to see that she's got that ability.
And she probably does it in a non-structured scenario, right? Like
Exactly,
like you just
exactly,
mentioned, just
exactly.
busting into
Yeah,
back
yeah.
bridge for no reason.
Exactly.
Don't you do that like at the supermarket?
No,
No, waiting in line.
no.
Buy your groceries.
I
Watch
do.
this.
I do. My favorite thing that Rob Wolf calls it old man gymnastics. That's pretty much what I do. I do old man gymnastics.
Well, you're getting good at it. I
Yeah,
guess that means you're just getting older.
that's right. Yeah.
Get into that category. All right. Is there anything else you think? needs-
One big one was glutes. We actually never.
Well, I brought
we said
up
hips
hip
and stuff, but-
flexors and I said hamstring and glutes, obviously, but we
Mhm.
didn't. We weren't talking about glute mobility per se. I just was saying like that whole system because that hip moves in every direction.
Mhm.
Then it's fair to address, the adductors, the abductors, the flexors, the extenders. Kind of that whole area needs love, needs attention.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to just hips all around, but definitely,
Yeah.
Yeah. Hips, spine,
yeah, hip, spine,
knees,
ankles.
and toes.
That's a song, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely is a
Yeah.
song.
I have
I sang it
seen like
recently.
I was gonna say you would know.
I've seen people with really poor. This is gonna sound hilarious. Toe mobility. Right?
Right.
They can't get into that like kneeling position,
Yeah,
which
huge.
which is that's a limiting thing. People
Yeah.
don't realize it because they just avoid it. They just don't. They just know it's not an option, so they're just like, I'm just not gonna go there.
Right.
But if you ask them to do it, they're like, oh shit, my toes.
Well, Coach BK brought up ankles in the beginning, right? And like, there's a huge correlation between toes and ankles.
Mm.
So if you have no ankle mobility, you have no toe mobility.
Yeah.
Because they basically pass the same joints, right? So working on both of those, I think, has merit. Big toe mobility is a key indicator of athletic ability. So that's a huge thing. So if you want to increase your athleticism, just spend all your time increasing
toe-
your big
big
toe
toe
mobility,
curls.
and all of a sudden you'll be Usain Bolt. That's a good one though, because it is affecting the whole leg, right?
Yeah,
So spending some time on that. Anything else you can think of?
I think that's it.
All right. It was fun. It was a good one. I love talking about like those kind of fringe. There's a little fringe but it has such value and it needs to be incorporated into programming, again, in the right dose and the right frequency. But I think it's something that needs to be always addressed and always considered. So,
And I think a lot of people should do it first,
yeah.
because for most people, it's not the sexy stuff. Most people find it less exciting than going in there and lifting heavy weights, right? And as a result, they need to do that mobility stuff first. Forget about the conventional order in which you should do things, because if you followed that, after your weights, you're just going to go home,
Right.
and you're not going to do it.
Right.
So prioritize that in the warm-up so that it gets done, so that you get better at it, and then move on to the stuff that you like.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it for today.
I think so.
It's a good show. Cover a lot of good things in mobility. Coach Oscar, where can we learn more about mobility and work with you?
TorontoMovementCollective.ca. Send me a message there, and we'll get you mobilized.
Awesome. Get you mobilized. And you can find us at Strong Athlete, social media, strongathlete.com. And you can check out our online coaching programs. You can try it free for 30 days using the discount code TEAM. Check out online coaching on our website. All kinds of great information on there. And we'll be back next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.